So, and we are doing this in part because it's going to be seen later by people through MCAT and so forth at their own convenience. So could I just remind everybody to turn off their cell phones, and bathrooms are right around the corner out there. What else? Some of the details. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the League of Women Voters. My name is Teresa Jacobs, and I'm a member of the League for many years, and I just happen to be the one heading up this particular event. This event will be videotaped, is being videotaped by MCAT as part of its media assistance grants to nonprofit organizations. It was going to be live streamed, but the unit just didn't work. So unfortunately, that's not for, maybe there are people at home waiting to watch this come on and waiting for the live stream, and it's not going to be there. So we'll put a notice on our Facebook page. And there's not a lot of people here tonight. We know there's a lot of competition, and there's a big event happening in Missoula tomorrow. But this will be shown again on MCAT. And so we are going to go for this and are grateful for all of you who came into the library. So before I go on any further, we have two special guests. One is Dana Cosby, and she is our Missoula County Election Administrative Officer. And Jason Marks is sitting to her left, and he is the Missoula County Chief Deputy Attorney. So they are going to be providing some rich resources for us as we try and look at LR129. The purpose of this forum is to help people understand what it is and to make an informed vote about this proposed law. Of course, people have their voter information pamphlet, and we're going to be looking at that too. If you haven't seen it show up in your mailbox, which is it's required that the Secretary of State sends it to every home, it is online also. So before we go any further, Linda Andrus, who is a longtime member of the League, former president, and also involved at the state level, is going to talk a little bit about the League and how we work within the political realm.
Thanks, Teresa. So the League of Women Voters is a national organization that is 98 years old this year. So pretty soon we'll be celebrating 100 years. The League is a nonpartisan organization, which means that we don't endorse candidates or parties. However, we do take positions on issues after we have conducted studies and come to a consensus of what we believe is the right thing on the issue. We believe the right to vote is a fundamental principle of our democracy. When more Americans can participate in our elections, the outcome better reflects who we are as a country. The League works year-round at the state and local level to enact voting rights and voting reforms that increase turnout and help all citizens participate in the process, making our elections more fair, free, and accessible. After a study on voting, the League has a national support of voters' rights and fair and open elections. Because of this, the League of Women Voters of Missoula opposes ballot issue LR129. The League of Women Voters will actively appeal to the public to vote no on ballot issues that undermine electoral systems or that disenfranchise voters in any way. And that's why we have put together this forum to help inform voters in our city, especially about LR129.
Thank you, Linda. So, let's have a
PowerPoint here. Oops. Tonight we're going to move through these topics here. The next is, what is LR129 and where did it come from? We'll just move through that. Well, you know, what's coming up next is we're going to look at the pros and cons of the voter information pamphlet. We're going to look at a couple issues that are not clear in the voter information pamphlet or are just missing, and as well as in the pros and cons. And then we'll be looking at some possible best practices for collecting absentee ballots. And then our county officials here are ready for a lot of questions that we've prepared ahead of time. And after that, there'll be time for audience questions, as well as the league is going to make a little summary. So our next topic is, where did LR129 come from? So as many of you already know, when the legislature passes a piece of legislation, it does not become law until and if the governor signs it. The governor's staff can do research and about the impact of proposed laws, so that the governor can pass it or veto it based on whether it's going to help or if it's going to make laws more confusing and unenforceable. He can also reject them if they're unnecessary and restrict citizens in the exercise of their rights. So in the case of LR129, this is the LR standing for Legislative Referendum. It was created by the passage of Senate Bill 352 in the 2017 Montana legislative session. Within Senate Bill 352, it described the contents of this law, and it designated that it would go to the people for a vote, and that's called a referendum. So rather than going to the governor, where it could be vetoed, it goes to the people, and we get to vote it up or down. But we don't have a staff to do that work for us. We are making use of our county officials. Thank you again for coming, because it's a very confusing bill. Now, it actually was referred as a bill by Senator Jeff Essman out of Billings, and the sponsor of the bill was Senator Albert Olszewski out of the Flathead area. And when Senator Olszewski spoke about this bill, and you can go to the Montana legislative website and watch the hearings on this bill and learn some things for yourself. He provided members of the legislature with an article from October 2016, referring to some complaints, and some of them were actually here in this county and some other around the state, of people who were concerned about the fate of their ballots after having met somebody at the door who asked for their ballots, and they turned it over, had some discussion about the content of the ballots, and then started thinking, well, maybe if I don't agree with them, what are they going to do with my ballot? So those questions went to different officials who said it's perfectly legal. And I think most people would, well, I'm just going to say, when someone comes to knock, if someone knocked on my door, cold call and asked for my ballot, I would I would wish them well and say I'll take care of it. But some people need to be educated on that, and they weren't, and they gave it over to them. So we'll talk more about that. In any case, we're back to the bill. There was a lot of discussion about that, and lots of other discussion too. It passed at a very close vote. But what's important also to note is that during all the hearings at the Senate and in the House, there was no members of the public who showed up to speak publicly in support of it, not a single. But there were many members who showed up, individuals, advocacy organizations, and associations who showed up in opposition, including, most notably, the Association of Clerks and Recorders that Dana is a part of. She wasn't there, but there are people who are in charge of elections around the state who could at that time speak for or against it, but in their capacity now as county employees, they can only provide information, just to be clear. So the league, and I think others, saw this article and the discussion of this as a potential wake-up call for organizations who help people to return their ballots.
that they might be more strict in their adherence to current laws and, even in the spirit of the laws. But there was no evidence of any lost ballots. There's been no evidence of tampering or lost ballots. So that's really important. So we're dealing with feelings and, some common sense. So we're going to look more closely at the full impact of LR129, because it's not just about restricting people in the collection of ballots. So we're going to move on and look at 6 different elements here. Oops. What I wanted to do is look at some existing law that protects ballots and protects voters from undue influence. So here's 2, and you can find these online, Montana Code Annotated. And here's one specifically that has to do with mail-in ballots, which is what we're talking about, mail-in ballots being absentee ballots. And this law, LR129, would be affecting this law in particular. I understand. I'm going to wait to hear from the experts. But there's some conflicts in it for sure. And so I just wanted to point out that we have existing law here. And in this case, when returning a ballot, an elector or an elector's agent or designee may return the elector's ballot on or before Election Day by either A is by the mail with sufficient postage affixed. Number 2 is to any place of deposit designated by the election administrator, and that there's laws about that. And it's just, the third one is just saying you need to get it in by 8 p.m. on Election Day. So that really pertains to what we're talking about tonight. So now this is the proposed legislation. This is what it will look like on your ballot if you haven't seen it already. It's what's in the voter information pamphlet. And I'm going to talk about, that's a lot of language that's hard for us to digest, but to sum it up, if I might, and I will invite our county experts to correct me if I say something in error immediately that's very drastic, or to correct me later, because I'm not a lawyer, but I've been studying this and I'm doing my best to try and sum it up. So and it's not just me, other members of the league, would sum this up as follows. Number 1, it would prohibit strangers from collecting the ballots of others. That's it. If you're a stranger, if you're not somebody known. And there's a definition of who is known. And the known people, I made this. Yeah, did you see this? The known people are 4 categories: a caregiver, a family member, household member, or an acquaintance. So number 2 is the people who are in this category, the known people, are allowed to collect others' ballots with 2 mandates. One is that they must, now see, this is not, I'm not sure about this one, but it sounds to me like the person has to personally deliver the other person's ballot to an election office or a polling place. But for sure it's saying this, that they must sign a registry there for every ballot they deliver, to include their name, their address and phone number, plus the voter's name and address, plus the nature of their relationship to the person, the voter, and their signature. So I'm a form maker. And this is just a sample that I drew up, just to, you would walk in, and if you brought your mother's ballot, you'd have to sign on here, and there's a record. Thank you. So the limitation, there's 2 mandates and 1 limitation. The limitation is that you may not collect, that person who is collecting, who is allowed, the only people who are allowed, may not collect and convey, to deliver, more than 6 ballots. So, and then there's one more provision, number 6. An individual who violates any provision of LR129 would be fined $500 for every ballot. So, next, we're going to look at the voter information pamphlet. And again, we're not gonna read the existing text. Deb Knight and I have put together a little reader's theater for you. And if you could just go along with it, we're going to be each taken apart. And Deb, you're on the opposition, right?
I am against.
Okay, you're against. So let me go first. Okay, come closer, Deb, because this is not, there we go. So let me, okay. So and this is a summary. This is our best summary from the voters' information pamphlet. And I'm going to try not to be emotional about it.
Okay.
So I'm speaking for LR129. You know, some people around Montana have complained about strangers knocking on their door and asking if they can take their ballot to the elections office. Intimidated by that situation, some gave their ballot only to regret it afterwards, especially after discussing how they voted. They worried about their fate of their ballot. Personally dropping off your absentee ballot is the most secure strategy. The elderly and the disabled may need to ask somebody to collect and deliver their ballot, but we must outlaw the wholesale collection of ballots by strangers.
Montana has never found any indications that collected absentee ballots have not been delivered to election officials as promised. It's unnecessary for the government to tell voters who they can trust to deliver their ballot. LR 129's requirement that election officials maintain a registry where ballots are delivered would distract them from important work. LR 129 would also impose barriers, bureaucratic red tape, and complications that punish good citizens and friends who help those with mobility and transportation challenges by collecting and delivering their ballots.
Okay, the case now is for in a rebuttal fashion. Yeah, well, LR 129 would require election officials to maintain a registration book where ballots are delivered to them. It does not describe any other duties. So, LR 129 would not necessarily create bureaucracy for election officials or involve them in identifying who can return ballots. No ballots will be turned away. LR 129 would not stop neighbors from helping neighbors. It would only limit strangers from collecting ballots to keep voters from feeling pressure to give their ballot to a person they don't trust or from feeling worried about vote stealing.
Montana has secure elections. There's no known instance of third parties failing to deliver absentee ballots. And no election official has ever provided evidence of a ballot given to another person being tampered with. There's no problem to fix. Voters who don't want to worry should only entrust the delivery of their ballot to a trusted friend, coworker, or community group. They can also track ballot delivery online. Unfortunately, LR 29 would interfere with efficient, easy ballot drop-off options that help Montanans who depend on help to have a say.
Thank you, Deb. So we're going to move along to what was not mentioned. It's not, if you go and look at the ballot language on LR 129, and if you look at the voter information pamphlet of the pros and the cons and the rebuttal, nobody mentions this issue, the 6 ballot limit that I talked about before. It's not even mentioned at all. So if somebody wants voters to give a up or down on this, I think it's, the question is, why is it not on there? If we're supposed to vote up or down, because there could be some unintended consequences of that, for sure, and we'll talk more about that. You know, the public at large is just not keen about all the details of this. It's not every, I mean, I don't know if anybody else has noticed this. I've been poring over this for weeks, And it's not even talked about in there. So I think it's a serious omission. What else is unclear is this question of how ballots can be or must be returned. In the ballot language, it says when they are returned to the elections office. And as we looked at before, the current law allows people to return somebody else's ballot, an agent or designee of the person can return it by mail. So this law doesn't explicitly say you can't do that. And I'm actually almost wanting to stop this right now and get clarification. Would any of you be willing to jump in that pool? Oops.
Now I've gone and broken it.
It's just the fuzzy.
There we go.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
I think this will work a little better. So I would agree that in terms of your interpretation of the language, certainly the signing the registration, filling out that information that's outlined there applies specifically to someone who takes, these ballots into the elections office or, some other designated delivery point designated by the elections administrator. In terms of such, I guess legislative interpretation, collect means, under the definition means to gain possession or control of the ballot. So if I were to, take a ballot from one of you and walk it to your mailbox, I have technically collected it, but then do not have, under this, would not have to, go into the elections office and, fill out the registry. So I think the only way that becomes relevant under this, language is if it's, somebody other than a family member, acquaintance, caregiver, etc., who's walking it to the mailbox. I mean, the way this is written, if I walk my wife's ballot to the mailbox, it's not an issue. If I walk her ballot, down to the elections office and drop it off, I have to fill out the registry. But under this, walking it to the mailbox is a non-issue. The only time that would come up is if a stranger were to walk a ballot to the mailbox, when they would technically be in violation of this were it to be adopted.
Jason, what about, may I call you Jason?
Please.
What about if somebody collects it from 4 neighbors and, who they know are, disabled or very busy or something, and they walk it down to the corner United States Post Office box? See, this is where is this line here of what is being required of people, and how do they know they're being compliant with the law, or if they would be doing something sneaky for which they could get caught and be charged $500 per ballot?
Well, I would be very fascinated how that would get caught, but I think really the key then would hinge on these 6 ballots. Just having read through this before coming here tonight, I see no issue with someone collecting 6 neighbors' ballots and taking, 6 neighbors' ballots and taking them to the post office and dropping them in the mail. It doesn't violate any of the plain language. They would be, in my mind, in violation if they were to collect that 7th ballot. I mean, technically, that would be in violation of this. So,
Dana,
do you have thoughts?
Sure. So there's a couple of things that are interesting about this. Number one, election officials don't always see every single person that drops off a ballot in the office. And it's not the same one that sees and polices that box. So our election officials I don't have a stance on this, but it does pose several challenges. LR129 does pose several challenges. One of them is our election officials then to police the box. So if someone goes out and collects their 6 ballots in one day, and they deposit them, and they come back the next day, in Missoula County, it's probably going to be a different person watching that ballot drop-off box. Are they then to check and make sure that they haven't delivered 6 ballots before? That is one of the questions we pose. And even in Missoula County, oftentimes my people in my space work split shifts. So it's 2 different people. In the morning it's one person, in the afternoon it's another. So don't know that this particular law is easily enforceable by the people who are then to facilitate its enforcement. Number 2, the people who are dropping off ballots, are they then to prove who they're dropping off their ballots for? Do they have to prove that, or is just a simple statement suffice it enough for that process? Number 3, it will increase if we are having voters fill out this registry of collected ballots because they have more than 6 ballots in their hands, which I will admit there are not many who do that. If they bring it into our office physically while we are open, it will increase lines at the ballot drop-off box. There are not typically lines now in Missoula County, but if they have to fill out this form because they have brought in more than their ballot and family members' ballots, then yes, we would then have a line. And the very last thing is, as Jason was talking about, it doesn't really reduce the potential for ballots to be collected by groups and then mailed into our office. There's no way for us to police that. As election officials, as postal service operators, I don't see an ability for that to be policed. And so I find this particular law in regards to the 6 ballot limit quite challenging. As an election official, I would hope that if it does pass, that we as election officials would receive some form of guidance either from our esteemed county attorney or the Secretary of State's office in the process.
Can I jump on one more thing?
Yeah, and I just, before you say something, I'm hearing a lot of things that are, it's still very confusing and Jason, if you could also speak to this in addition to what you were gonna say, this question of if you are not a stranger, don't you still have to sign the registry if you come? And the question is, if you come in the elections office where they have the registry, but what about the ballot drop-off box outside? So please continue.
I mean, I would assume under this, if it were to become law, the ballot drop-off box would go away and you would have to go in.
The nighttime.
Yeah, you would have to actually go in and physically sign a registry. Although, just on the topic of confusing, and I get in that theme, one of the exceptions for you can give it to a non-stranger is, and it came up when Dana was talking about hard to police, this idea of an acquaintance, and what does that mean? For instance, John up here in the front row and I had a brief chat before this started. I think we're probably now acquaintances. He knows who I am. I know who he is. I mean, does that mean I can take his ballot or not? I mean, that's hard to police under this kind of vague definition. And I'm sorry, John, I don't mean to draw attention to you, but I mean, it's a good example of, it's not necessarily your neighbor or your cousin or something like that, but what does acquaintance mean, since it's this exception category? It's not particularly clear, and I could foresee it leading to, enforcement issues if someone were to make an issue about it. If I come to your door and introduce myself and talk about who I am and what I'm doing, and then who I am, I mean, I think arguably I'm an acquaintance. So
let's take the scenario into the last week when it's too late to mail and know for sure that your ballot will arrive through the mail. So now there's no ballot drop-off boxes. If this was to pass, right? Then there's no ballot drop-off boxes. Is that what you're saying, Dana?
Probably,
Probably.
okay, probably, and no ballot, no slots in doors in other places around the state?
Right, no nighttime drop-off box. You would have to come into our office or use in Missoula County at the drive-through process and sit in your car and wait to sign the registry that those were your ballots or your husband's ballots or your grandma's ballots.
So if you can take the ballot to a mailbox and nobody is going to, again, you're saying that this doesn't prohibit that, but I'm not sure what the purpose of a registry is if ballots can be delivered both ways. I don't know what the purpose of the registry is. Can anybody speak to that?
So I think that the registry process was included in this law so that if an individual is bringing in ballots from someone else, we capture both people's information as election officials, and we then have the opportunity, if someone calls and says, I gave my ballot to a stranger, that we could call and police that process. So I think that's what the intention of the registry was. Election officials were not consulted in that process.
Yeah, and it's unclear who would be monitoring whether public officials from the state are going to be asking for copies of everybody's registry and seeing if anybody brought in 7. So I am imagining, what if there's a book group and, or a group of people at a workplace and they're in the lunch group and they go, oh, tomorrow's the election. Okay, I'm going to bring my ballot. Somebody says, okay, I'll take all the ballots and I'll go during lunch so everybody doesn't have to go. And they pull all the ballots, ignorant of the law or really thinking the law wouldn't really penalize them. And they get down there and they said, oh, I have to sign this registry, and they have 7 ballots. So now the person, what are they going to do? They can't not turn in the 7th ballot, but they can't not sign the registry either, or they will get a $500 fine potentially. So they they register the delivery of 7 ballots there. That means that someone could look at that and there's evidence there of a crime. So you were just doing a favor for a coworker, and now you've got to potentially have to worry about a $500 fine for being a good friend. And that's one of the concerns the league has about this, is the anxiety it provokes. Whereas somebody else maybe just dropped it in the mailbox one day before. They put 10 of them from their book group, and there's no consequences for them. So what is this? Please, if you have any more to say about that, Jason.
Well, I would just say, I think, and Dana may be able to speak better to this than I do, because I don't have, some of the connections in the, elections area. But, I think the reality is people that are doing these, ballot collection activities, to the degree they're happening, and I don't even know how common that is, they're probably not spending the money to put stamps on all of them, because it's a financial issue. And I would suspect that if it's not, just drafting oversight on the part of the folks that wrote this, then that's probably what they were looking to target with this. So, I guess that's my one thought. The other thing, just in terms of fear and anxiety, there are, not fraud to be clear, but ballot irregularities in every single election. Something goes wrong because elections involve humans, and there's always human error. Dana's office will get absentee ballots that went to a husband and wife. They came back and they got them swapped and they signed the wrong ones. It wasn't they were trying to vote for somebody else or, do something fraudulent. It was just a mistake. And, in terms of the enforcement end of things, which my office is involved in, that's something we're highly cognizant of, and we're not, those absentee ballots may not count, but it's not like we're gonna go track them down and try and prosecute them for a mistake that happened at the kitchen table. The other thing to keep in mind, just broadly speaking, when it comes to this issue and, the idea of anxiety regarding whether a ballot got turned in or not. I get absentee ballots just for convenience. I got mine on Saturday. I dropped it off on Monday. I checked today before I came over here on the Secretary of State's website, and it showed that Dana's office received and accepted it. I have no question that my ballot got through, the process in her office where I just dropped it in a drop box and, is going to be counted. So there is that mechanism in place in law currently for anybody who's concerned to be able to look and see, did that ballot actually get there, or is it riding around in my niece's car and she totally forgot to drop it off? And if that's what happened, then you can go in an election day and vote provisionally. Because, things happen because humans are humans. So that's, I guess, a couple thoughts I had on the anxiety issue.
Okay, so do you have another comment? Jen?
Sure.
Uh,
So currently, people can collect your ballot from you at your home and bring it to our office. We have fielded calls in our office regarding that, a couple of them. And what we tell our voters is, your ballot is precious to you. That is your opinion. Treat it like your grandma's wedding ring. If you don't trust that person you're handing your ballot to like you would your grandma's wedding ring, don't give it to them. Put 2 stamps on it, send it into our office. Drop it off at one of our night boxes. They go inside a locked building that is under surveillance, or like the ballot drop-off box at the courthouse, even your taxes are put in through that drop-off box. Or you can utilize the hours that we're open at the election center at the fairgrounds. And finally, we are offering a ballot drive-through drop-off box where we'll have 3 of our election officials waiting to help you take your ballot, put it into the drop-off box, same type of drop-off box, 3 people making sure everything is very secure. So again, your ballot is your opinion and it's precious to you, or it should be. Treat it like your grandma's wedding ring. If you are concerned about the person who's knocking at your door to take your ballot from you, don't give it to them. Shut the door. You don't have to listen to them. You don't have to listen to them at all. That's how we have been explaining to voters what to do if they feel worried about the person asking to take their ballot for them.
Okay, thank you. So I failed to mention before that we will be taking questions from the audience also, and if you need a piece of paper or a card and a pen, there are volunteers who are ready to provide them, and then they will be screening them to make sure there's not repetitions and so that it's understandable, and I'll read them later. So I'm gonna, there's so much more to talk about in terms of the limit and whether, what is the, does that limit of 6 ballots, what harm does that create to allow someone to collect more than 6 ballots? I'm not sure, that's the question. And then what is the harm done by limiting someone to collect more than 6 ballots? So just to think about that, I want to talk a little bit about the league's response to this. A lot of us were also empathetic with the idea of someone knocking on your door and not really liking or being confused by that. And so I did some outreach to some of the groups who testified at the legislature to ask them what is their process that they use. The clerks and recorders who testified at the legislature also made some suggestions about how to educate voters, like Dana just did, about how to treat your ballot and how to talk to someone at your door if you don't like what they're doing. But there's also there are safeguards. Jason said one of the safeguards is being able to check online at my voter page Montana, or you can put my voter page MT is all you have to search for that, and that's where you can track whether your ballot came in or not. But another check is introducing a process whereby if you give somebody your ballot, you ask for a receipt. And that's something that the clerks and recorders mentioned at the legislature, and some groups informally do that, and they have very strenuous guidelines that I could see. So what I would like to do is have some of our league volunteers pass out
and you guys have it on your table there. I did a compilation, basically, of some of the best of what I saw, and I added more common sense courtesies, like not just showing up at someone's door and asking for their ballot, but contacting them by email or by telephone if they're somebody who's a part of your, gets email from your organization, newsletters. That's so that they can initiate it. That's one sort of courtesy, but the other thing would be that people, and they already do this, they have a log of what ballot they picked up and where they delivered it. But as a part of that, they give a receipt to the person, and the person signs this to say that, yes, I entrust my sealed, signed, and dated ballot to the individual named on this page, and who has said they're willing to do me a friendly civic favor and promise to deliver my ballot to the elections office as soon as possible. I release my ballot to this person under my own free will, with no pressure or undue influence, and no reward or promise of reward. That's according to state law. I will get a receipt. So if every person who was out collecting ballots had someone sign that, then that gives somebody the saying, well, I feel a little, uncomfortable with this, and then the person really should back off, because they would be in violation of state law for putting any undue influence on a voter for even voting at all. That's in our current state laws. So the League is all about paying attention to what's already on the books and making sure that we're in compliance with that, in the detail of it and in the spirit of that, so that voters are respected, not only their ballots, but the voters themselves, and their right to vote or not is respected. And so we think that the receipt, and it does sort of the same thing as what this registration book is, because the person themselves would have the name of the organization, if there was an organization, the name of the person who to contact, and right on this sample receipt that the League has created here is how to contact your county elections office, how to complain to the Montana Secretary of State's office. They have a fair election center. And how to check on the My Voter page. So there's lots of recourse for people. And so I want to, and we will provide this to other organizations. If you're listening, call the League and we'll send you a PDF of this. So that is the League's idea of the best way forward to both safeguard voters and our election system and not interfere in any way with people's right to vote. So one of the consequences that we see is the potential of people who are living in the rural areas. And I actually did talk with someone who was doing a Get Out the Vote in the Browning area, where she was driving 35 miles, but sometimes she says it's over an hour just to get to someone's home. And these people don't have mail delivery in their neighborhoods. Their post office box is at the city, in the city, which is over an hour away. And sometimes the same post office box is shared by several individuals. So for Get Out the Vote efforts on the reservations, sometimes they are having to get people their ballots, like where did it go? It's sitting on somebody else's counter and they didn't quite get it to the person. So the same problem is getting it back from them. A lot of folks are out there, they may not have a car, they may not have time. There's a lot of, I had a discussion recently with someone, and it's similar to what I heard at the legislature, which is it comes to you in the mail, and so you should be able to turn your ballot in the mail. It should be a simple process. And so the thing that I would like to say is there a way to imagine that for someone else it's not as easy as it is for some people? If somebody, a 65-year-old person with an ailment who doesn't have a car, who's over an hour away from the county, they need someone to come pick up their ballot. And if this person comes out to a community where there's 7 people and they all have their ballots, what is that person supposed to do? Do they have to go get another person to come and collect the last ballot? So that's the harm that could be done, is if one uses their imagination, it can disenfranchise people who are in remote situations and they can't afford the time or the money and to get it back themselves. And maybe it's the last week and they're like me and you procrastinate doing a little more research. Not everybody nails it back right away on purpose. So there are some other questions that we have for our county officials from the league. And so one of the questions I actually posed to the sponsor, Senator Ocheski, is what did he mean by no ballots will be turned away? And he said that it is the state law that no ballots can be turned away. So how would you, if someone showed up with 7 ballots at the election center, how can you imagine that being handled so that the person, if this law passed, so that that person wouldn't feel like they're going to get in trouble or get a fine? Is there any way around that?
So if this law passes and the 7th ballot was delivered, then we would accept the 7th ballot, and at that point, since the law says that you can only submit 6 ballots other than your own, then we would then take that person's information and send it over to Jason's office. Sorry to pass the buck on that, Jason, but you get to answer that question.
Yeah, that's where it was going. Is that person going to be fined?
And that is not something I'd be able to answer without more information about the particular circumstance. Because as I said, I mean, sometimes there's totally innocent mistakes that happen during, well, many times there's totally innocent mistakes that happen during an election. That's where, I guess, prosecutorial discretion comes in, and is an innocent mistake or somebody, for lack of a better term, intentionally violating the law. And then we would have to approach it on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. So what if we have a situation, and I actually have talked with an activities director at a local nursing home. So this is not a remote situation, and it would be the case of a caregiver or caregivers at the nursing home, but they on average have 60 absentee ballots at one of the local nursing homes, which they usually put a stamp on it and deliver it. So you're saying they can still do that? They don't have to deliver it in person, except in the last week when it's too late to mail it. You know, maybe there's some procrastinators at the nursing home, and so then if they had those, they'd have to come to the elections office. And what if they had 24? That would mean 3 different staff people would have to, 24, so yeah, 4 staff people would have to take time out of their day and bring it over to the elections office, not working at the election, not working at the nursing home, but standing in line. So Dana, could you speak to the possibility of lines and how long they might be in that last week before elections, given the dynamics that you already see with election ballot return during election season?
Sure. So I work in the elections office. My husband gets his ballot via absentee. I get my ballot via absentee. Those are the 2 people who are of voting age in my household. And when I return our ballots, because I work within that office, I then too would have to sign said registry. Okay, so I have watched people come in, bring the ballots in with them. Most of the time it's 2, 4, maybe at the most, because there's 4 people of voting age in a household. All of those people, moms, dads, sisters, brothers, I brought it in for my grandmother, they would have to sign that. Right now, ballots just went out to people, as Jason mentioned, on Friday. Most of Missoula City voters got theirs on Saturday. Some people in our outlying areas got their ballots on Monday and Tuesday of this week. We are seeing a large number of ballots being delivered to our office. At this time, people do have to come inside to deposit their ballot if they bring it all the way down to our office. So we're talking a line already, and we are still almost 20 days out from the election. So if this does pass, we can potentially plan on the fact that either we increase the number of people who are sitting there waiting to help voters,
Sign the registry?
sign the registry, or we expect lines starting 20 days out from the election.
And Jason, if somebody came in with 8 ballots and somebody informs them, oh, you shouldn't have brought more than 6, can they leave with those? Can they leave with those 2 ballots and go find someone else to deliver them? You know, is there a violation of law by not turning them over at your first opportunity?
There's no violation of law by not turning them over at your first opportunity. Beyond that, I'm not going to speculate.
Okay, if you can find a trustworthy person to carry it in. So, okay, I'm gonna move on to some of these other questions. So Dana, you spoke in a little summary that you did, that it doesn't reduce the potential for ballots to be collected by groups and then mailed into the election office. So if the intention of this was to stop strangers, I mean, you know, on the reservation, in that example, the person who might be out there driving around long distances to pick up ballots for people who can't, that person actually might be a stranger. You know, they might know him, but they might be a stranger. So what keeps strangers from violating the spirit of this proposed law by just putting it in a mailbox and walking away?
Well, I mean, I think if someone were to do that and collect 20 strangers' ballots and pay the postage and drop them in the mailbox, or if they're already postmarked, drop them in the mailbox, I mean, they would technically be violating this. It wouldn't just be the spirit. It's an enforcement issue. How would anyone ever know? And, you know, really, I think probably by the time they, you know, sat down and talked to the person and got, you know, established the trust to be able to take their ballot, they're probably an acquaintance at that point anyway.
So so they might meet the definition of that they are allowed to collect, but then if they're dropping off more than 6 now, when this went through the legislature, Senator Olszewski answered a couple questions about why 6, and he says it was arbitrary, and he that's what he said. And he said he did a survey of some of his associates in the legislature, some neighbors and so forth. So that number, I mean, it's affecting people's lives, right? If you, and so I don't know what would happen if somebody said, okay, well, I know everybody who I talked to today, so I'm an acquaintance. But if they brought, you know, 8 ballots in from the rural areas and went to the county post office box and put it in there, I don't want to be redundant, but you're pretty much saying that's unenforceable, that the law is unenforceable in that regard.
It would present some serious challenges to enforcement.
Yeah. Okay. So are there any questions from the audience that we can mix in here? Because I want to make sure that we get a good
And just if I could jump in on the audience question session, just to be totally clear, by state law, Dana and I cannot give opinions on, you know, the merits of this particular legislation. We're just here informationally. If you catch me walking my dog, I can give you an opinion about anything, but I'm here in my official capacity, as is Dana, so please don't ask our opinion on anything.
Okay, so this is a question from audience member. Has there been any reaction at this point from tribes about LR129? Is there any, I don't know how anybody would, has anybody talked with either of you?
I've not seen or heard of any statements or press releases from any of the tribes in Montana regarding this. I would be interested in seeing something if they have given a press release. I know that none of our media outlets have covered it, and I do keep up with election info in Montana, so no, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
And someone is asking, why are we not seeing much or hearing much about this in the news? It feels like all the other ballot issues are getting, that this doesn't seem to be getting much attention. Sorry, I'm not reading that.
I think that we're not seeing much of it in the news because there's not much support for or against it. The other issues have lots of support coming through them from outside entities, and this also doesn't, this will hit county monies because we will have to increase our staff in the local elections office, but people do not realize that we will have to increase staff to manage this process within our local county elections offices. So I think the other ones hit people's pocketbooks directly, and this type of ballot measure hits their pocketbooks after they've already paid their taxes. So they don't realize that this will affect budgets and budget constraints within our offices.
And just going along with that that theme, what effect? And maybe it's hard to answer, but can you imagine or anticipate how this would change the work that you do in the office? You just said you might have to add more staff, but again, you don't know any more about it than we do. There's no duties other than to keep a registry, right? Yeah.
Yes, correct. And I would say that someone would have to man that registry to make sure that the voter dropping off any ballots would have to then make sure that the person signed that registry.
So what would be what would you imagine to be the procedure if someone is just walking in with their absentee ballot, one envelope, and do you imagine there would be a separate line so that the express drop off? Or would they have to get in the long line behind people who have more than one ballot so we know one of them can't be theirs? Are people who have one ballot going to have to show ID to say, yes, this is mine, I didn't just want to get out of here faster?
That is part of the challenges that this law will pose if it passes. How are election officials to know who they are to that elector? Do they have to show that it's themselves? Do they have to show that those other people belong to their household, that they're acquaintances? How do you prove that? So all of those challenges are part of the process we have to work through if this does pass.
Okay, and another question about the registry, and this would be more about privacy. Given that one person might be signing right after another person, and that this might be could be considered a public document, FOIA accessible. This is providing personal information that Tina somebody and Douglas somebody are both living in the same household, and she's dropping off the ballot for him. I mean, that's giving a lot of information that maybe someone didn't wish to divulge, but in accordance with compliance with this, so they don't get a $500 fine, they would maybe be sharing and really sharing information that they might not want to share.
I guess on that front, I'd say whether it's for good or ill, the majority of the information that would be on this registry is publicly available already. The only thing that wouldn't be publicly available is the nature of the relationship, acquaintance, caregiver, something like that. But in terms of, addresses and all that stuff, that's all publicly available.
But it will say who's living in the same home, because both, you're required to put your address and the address of the person that you are delivering for. So that's additional information.
Well, and I don't disagree, I'm just saying
Right,
that
okay.
if someone were to look at the voter rolls for, say, Missoula County, they would show that my wife and I, and we don't share a last name, but that we have the same address, clearly indicating we share a household, and that's all public, because we are registered to vote.
So in regards to the defining the nature of your relationship, there are four listed in the referendum. and it is a election official. Oh, no, so that's election official and postal workers are not, this doesn't apply to them. So it allows caregivers, family members, household members, or an acquaintance. So would you interpret that as that people have 4 choices that they could put down as to the nature of the relationship? They would probably have to circle them or something like that?
We would have to, if this does pass, ask people what acquaintance you are to the person you're delivering your ballot for, and we would have to assume that they're telling us the truth.
So would other relationship categories be allowed, do you think? Somebody's asking that.
So I would say no. However, most people probably could figure out a way to fall into one of those 4 categories. I will say the family member category is kind of ambiguous to me, because are we supposed to count third cousins as your family member, or can we just say that you're my third cousin? Surely at some point there's a limit. And also on that, as Jason has already talked to, an acquaintance. I know Jason, but I don't know that I would give him my ballot, because I treat my ballot like I do my grandmother's wedding ring. So I trust him, but not that much.
Thank you. So along this theme here, if LR129 were to pass, and we're looking now at the existing law having to do with mail-in ballots, so it sounds like you're saying it wouldn't interfere with A, so you could still return somebody's ballot as long as you know them by the mail with sufficient postage. But what about the beginning of that there, where it says, right now the power seems to be in the hands of the voter, and they can select an agent or a designee to return their ballot. And it sounds to me like that could be a stranger, but I can tell you that you're honest. I'm going to give it to you as my designee or my agent. So would that be wiped out of it, the volition on the part of the person to give it to a stranger if they want to? And is there any power that would remain in the hands of voters, or would we be put upon by a law that we create by passing this that says, no, you don't know that person, you can't call them your agent or your designee, they have to be one of these 4 categories?
I think in answer to the question, yes, this law, if passed, would restrict the choice of a voter and who they can, make their designee or agent. It does not remove their ability to make someone their designee or agent for purposes of returning their ballot, but it restricts who they can choose. So the laws are not in conflict, but this would certainly modify existing statute.
And narrow down their choices. They couldn't just give it to somebody on the basis of them being a part of an organization that they're a part of, that they trust, okay? All right, so we already asked that question. So has there been an issue in regards to fraudulent ballots being turned in for elections in Montana?
I think that there's part of the answer to that is defining what a fraudulent ballot could be. And so in our office, a ballot that has been a household swap, you accidentally signed your wife's envelope and you guys swapped envelopes. Some people call that fraudulent. We consider that to be a household swap, and we contact the voter and we have the voter come in and we fix that problem within our office. We issue them a new envelope, or we void the ballot that we received, and the voter has the opportunity to vote a new ballot, and the old ballot is then destroyed or voided. As far as blatant fraudulent activities within the state of Montana, they're very negligible. If they happen so infrequently that we don't see it, but we can't say with 100% certainty that there's zero fraud in Montana, but it's not brought to election administrators' attention or county attorney's attention, so much so that we can successfully say that we have seen any kind of fraudulent activities regarding absentee ballots in the state of Montana.
And would you concur with that, Jason?
I would. I mean, there have been a couple instances where we've, asked for some follow-up investigation to be done because there was something that, didn't fall into the obvious mistake category, but at least as far as my office goes, while I've been there, we've never seen something that's actually fraud as we would think of it versus some sort of mistake that, was not with the intent of, somehow subverting the election process.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions here on similar themes. So somebody says, is LR129 a waste of time and money? It's sort of subjective, but let's talk a little bit related to that as a different question. It says, if this is going to be, let me just preface this. If you look on the legislation for Senate Bill 352, and they always have a fiscal note, it's zero. So this is not going to cost the state any more money. But at the county level, we're hearing that, and this is a question someone is posing. So in addition to, shouldn't voters have been provided with the ballot language and the pros and cons in the voter information pamphlet does not mention the 6 ballot limit. So before I go into this, does that omission itself put this in any kind of jeopardy if it was passed? That omission. And I'm going to go along and ask, there's 2 omissions here. If this is going to be more costly for our election offices, shouldn't the public have been made more aware of that cost? Like it was discussed during the special election when the U.S. House seat, when they didn't want to use the absentee ballots, they said it was going to cost more. So don't we need to know the fiscal note, and don't we need to know all the details of what we're being asked to pass?
Well, so as to all the details,
Or the main elements, which is the ballot, the limit of 6. Would you say that's minimal, or is that significant?
and that's one way I may not render an opinion, but when it comes to ballot language, the legal requirements are that, one, it has to be under 100 words. I don't know why 100, but it's a real thing. And that it has to generally describe, and I emphasize generally there, the nature of what this would do, and it has to be impartial. Whether or not the not including the 6 ballot limit, violates, it's too general, it leaves out something important. I mean, that's something that, frankly, would have had to have been litigated at the Supreme Court in challenging what the Attorney General's office wrote up in terms of the ballot language, and that hasn't happened.
It would have to have been challenged before we vote and not after?
I believe so, although if somebody can correct me, I'll certainly listen to them, but it's something that has to be challenged when they draft the proposed ballot language, and it has been for other things, but this was not something that was challenged.
Okay, so if the voters wanted to challenge it, they would basically have to go back to the drawing board and create new legislation, or legislators have to.
That's my off-the-cuff answer, yes.
Okay, all right. So this is a question about the registry again. Would it not serve as a form of self-incrimination?
If you're signing that you're turning in more than 6 ballots, yes.
And then, but what would the voters' choice be if they have 7 ballots? What would their legal, and they've already, if you look at the definition, it's conveying and, collect means to have it in your possession.
To take possession, yes.
Yeah, so if you show up with 7 ballots, you've already violated. Is that true? I'm asking for your opinion, I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's an opinion I can give. Under the text of this, yes.
Just showing up with 7 ballots, you've already violated.
Not even showing up, just having them.
Right, even in the front seat of your car?
Yes.
Right. Okay, that starts to feel a little scary. Okay, so what would be, and then the registry then would serve as a form of incrimination, self-incrimination. Are there any laws that protect people from not doing that because they don't want to, like, it's like pleading the fifth, I'm not going to say I did it?
Well, I mean, they could always not sign it, that just leads to some other,
That leads to another
issues.
violation of not signing the registry,
Right.
given that any provision would, any violation of any provision of this. Okay, so you can see why it starts to get complicated. Can the fine, the $500 fine be waived? And there's another question here for you, Jason. Describe how you will prosecute a violation of LR129.
I'm not going to answer the second one, because as I think I said earlier, I mean, it's, anytime there's a potential violation of law, it's really, a case-by-case basis in terms of how that's handled. There's just no way to give a blanket answer into how our office would handle the violation of a particular statute. With that being said, what was the other part of the question? Could the fine be waived?
And then how it would be violated, so you said you could.
I would say that, yes. I think in terms of any fine, the judge, who would be the one imposing the sentence, has to make a finding about ability to pay. So, to the degree that's an issue, I mean, it ultimately is going to depend on, the exercise of discretion by the judge. It wouldn't be our office making that decision.
So this person is asking, wouldn't this entire concern be better addressed by having the Secretary of State's office simply underwrite the cost of postage using a common bulk mailing USPS postage paid? And this is asking for an opinion, but it's.
Sure, so right now, the mail-in ballot process is a topic that is discussed on the national level. It's not just a Montanan topic. If a voter, and many state laws say that the voter has to mail in their ballot and follow the procedures laid out by the Postal Service for that mailing process. That includes putting postage on the ballot. So if a voter, the question then is, if a voter does not give enough postage for that ballot to be paid by the voter, did the voter effectively vote that ballot? Most election officials, in fact, I can't think of any of them that would turn away a ballot because too little postage was issued for that ballot. In Missoula County, if a ballot comes to us with too little postage, the county absorbs that cost. So if a voter does submit a ballot that doesn't have enough postage on it, it comes out of your tax-paying money.
So when you consider the cost of that versus the cost of increasing the staff in your office, Dana, and your office having to deal with infractions, is there a, I guess I'm actually begging the question, is there not a better way of dealing with the concern of somebody knocking on somebody's door, and if that's really what we're getting at here, that we don't want somebody, and we don't want somebody wholesale collecting ballots. But in the case of the 60 nursing home residents, see, that's a wholesale collection of ballots, and somebody's asking here, what, if there's 60, somebody is taking that example, 60 residents of a nursing home delegate someone to deliver their ballots, and if that person got in trouble and wouldn't do it again, or if the nursing home decides not to collect ballots from them anymore because it just takes too much time from the nursing home staff, and somebody got a fine, then isn't that disenfranchisement? Is that not a concern? That when people are going to refuse to help other people, it's too much of an opinion, isn't it? Yeah, I can't ask, okay. But you can see the scenario, right? That people might be afraid of collecting someone else's ballots because they don't want to break the law and don't want to pay a fine. So what additional measures will the elections office have to implement to enforce LR129?
Well, one of the additional measures that would be required would be that voters would have to sign a registry. The question would be asked to not only our county attorney's office, but also Secretary of State's office for some rules around that process. And what if I am just dropping off my ballot? Do I have to prove that this is just my ballot? If it is just my own ballot, do I still need to sign the registry? According to the law, no, but how are election officials supposed to police that process? So those are questions that we would pose to both the Secretary of State's office, and I'm sure they're already getting those questions as well as our local county attorney's offices, because those are definitely questions that would be asked if this does pass.
So for the common person who, in Missoula, who is able-bodied and is used to returning their own ballot, they also, it sounds like they could also be affected by this. They won't have a drop-off box anymore, so they will have to, if they don't mail it, they'll have to come during, is it 8 to 5 that the hours, Monday through Friday?
Right, we are open 8 to 5, Monday through Friday at the elections office. The week before the election, for this election, we are staying open until 6 to better service our voters. And then we do have 2 days of Saturday voting as well. Those are the 2 Saturdays before the election, 9 until 1. So we, in Missoula County, we do our best to offer ample amount of time for people to return their ballot or to get make any changes to their voter registration information, or to simply register to vote and receive their absentee ballot. But this process would, yes, do away with any nighttime ballot drop-off boxes. If voters still continue to use the ballot drop-off box outside of the courthouse where tax payments are delivered to, we would then have to establish a procedure of getting in touch with those voters and verifying information that we would later, if it does pass, that would be one of the questions we would pose, not only to the county attorney, but also the Secretary of State's office.
Okay, so if this passed, and thank you for giving us current information, but mine was more of a hypothetical. So if this passed and the common citizen who is used to dropping off their ballots downtown at the county courthouse where people drop off taxes might get a phone call that says, did you actually drop off your ballot? Or what?
I'm not sure what that procedure would be. Again, we would talk with our county attorney's office about what procedure we would have to enforce for that, as well as with the Secretary of State's office. I'm sure that if this does pass, we would be getting a new whole section of rules on how to administer this particular part of the law.
So for the common person, it might be confusing. So I can drop it in a blue USPS post office box, but I can't drop it off at the county. Is that because of the rules? Because, yeah. I mean, you have to put postage on one, or you're technically supposed to, but it will be, even if you have postage, it will go through. But, so please.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that's hard to know unless this is passed and, the Secretary of State's office, generates some rules around this.
Okay.
It's just hard to speculate on what that's going to end up looking like.
Okay, so rather than dropping off a ballot, though, on the way to work or in the evening or on the weekend, people would have to put it in the mail or take it into the elections office during the open hours. And if they're bringing their ballot, or if they're bringing someone else's ballot, they still might have to get in a line, so there will be lines forming. So this, let me ask this question, is that disenfranchisement when we set barriers in front of people to make it, they're late for work, or their children are having a tantrum because they're standing in line and need their naps? Is this voter disenfranchisement?
And that's not an opinion that we're able to give.
Okay, I'm actually opinionating on behalf of the league, because our perspective is that we need to make it easy for people to vote, not put up barriers. So I think we're just about done with questions. Is there any other questions that have popped up into people's minds? Okay, well,
Could we take a second try at a question, please?
yeah, go ahead. And I also want to, if there's anything that we haven't covered, I want to give both of you a chance to share too.
Dana, I don't think you addressed the question of prepaid postage on an alternate. And I would think that the Clerks and Recorders Association or other groups would support the Secretary of State. I mean, if the Secretary of State's going to pay the postage of sending out voter education pamphlets, why not have the Secretary of State cover postage of ballots being returned? And so, I mean, all of this fuss would disappear, because you can just put it on your mailbox.
Well, and we know that it won't disappear for everybody because they can't get to the mailbox, so
The
that's
people
right.
in Browning that you
Or,
mentioned.
but even the
outside.
people in the nursing homes and,
Well, no, the nursing home, they have mail that goes to nursing homes.
Right, but in the last week, their staff will have to take time out in order to, it's not as simple because of all the different, I just needed to point that out, that being able to return by mail in the last week, people can't use stamps and get it there on time, and that's when the crunch is going to be for procrastinators and people who are delivering ballots for other people.
And John, I know you asked the question of Dana, but I think part of the reason she didn't directly answer is because to directly answer would kind of give an opinion on the merits of this versus something else. So I don't know that she can do that. I will say, broadly speaking, as county officials, we would be delighted anytime the state would want to pick up costs that are shifted to counties. Whether it's this or any of the other issues where state laws and state regulations shift costs to counties and impact our budgets. I mean, 100% across the board, anything where the state would assume the costs of services we provide residents to Missoula County, it's certainly a good thing. But I don't know that we can opine about whether something would be better or worse than this particular legislative referendum.
Okay, and Dana, do you have anything more to share?
The last thing I have to share is just a reiteration of your ballot is your opinion. If somebody knocks at your door, you don't know them, and they offer to take the ballot for you, and you do not feel comfortable, remember, the ballot is your opinion, and voters have several ways that they can return their ballot. If they do feel comfortable giving their ballot over to a stranger, then by all means, you're welcome to give your ballot over to that stranger under our current laws. I would encourage voters to call and ask questions. Visit us online at MissoulaVotes.com. We are happy to answer any questions that voters have. We're happy to check absentee ballot statuses. If you have submitted your absentee ballot, maybe through one of the parties that we are discussing, we can let you know if your ballot was received and what date it was received on in our office. Again, treat your ballot like you would your grandmother's wedding ring, and that's my final opinion on that.
Okay, and so I just want to say one last summary of what the League's position on this, and we often are just doing being a neutral party, educating people, but when it comes to LR129 and other bills that we feel could disenfranchise people, we exercise our long tradition of advocacy to protect voting rights and election integrity, and vocalize our opposition. Nancy Leifer, who couldn't be here tonight, she's one of our co-presidents, said in an op-ed, LR129 is both unnecessary and harmful. And we know that voter security and election security is important, but we don't find that there is any evidence that there's been any tampering or lost ballots, and we think education is the way to do it. And we don't think all efforts to reform voting practices are a good thing. if we take both the security and access by voters, and that's our main concern here, is that this puts barriers for people, and it's important to remember that, to try and imagine that all people, please imagine all the ways people cannot do what is easy for others. Some people can't, and they do rely on others to help them, and we're putting barriers in their way, especially with the limit of 6 and the fines. So with that, we are at the end of our time, and I wanted to just, for those who are going to find this on MCAT, you can also, and again, this was not live streamed because we didn't, the equipment failed, so we're going to be putting out word of this, that people can go to the League of Women Voter website. Okay, but here's MCAT, and this is where it can be found. It will be on a video on demand, as well as shown on MCAT on November 4th and 5th. But we will put anything that we have, that we receive up on our League of Women Voter website, and it's where there's an op-ed and a press release. You go to League of Women Voters of Missoula and find that. And then the last thing is just to remind people what Dana already did, that November 6th is Election Day with polls open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and that people can late register at the elections office even on Election Day. Is that right? Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending, especially to our guests. Please join me in a round of applause for them. And thanks to MCAT.